Okay, so now we're starting with this is page 10, and this is about cherry pies. Now, okay, so I'll remind you about a couple of these things first. So you learned about marginal revenue last class, and that is just going to be the extra amount of total revenue. So marginal revenue will equal the extra amount of total revenue when you increase the quantity by 1 unit. So we're given the marginal revenue. What it tells us is that for the first unit, the producer is paid $6 for the first unit. So their total revenue from the first unit is $6. For the second unit, they are also paid $6. And now the total will be 6 plus 6, so 12. For the third unit, they are also paid $6, so now the total will be 6 plus 6 plus 6, so $18, and so on. So each time the seller sells an extra cherry pie, they're getting paid an extra $6. So for the total revenue, we just keep adding another 6. Okay, marginal cost and total cost are the next column. So marginal cost is the extra cost, so the change in total cost with 1 extra unit of the good. So the first unit costs $3. So total also then for the first unit is 3. For the second unit costs $3.50. So the total is 3 plus 3.5. So 6.5. The third unit costs an extra $4. So the total now is 3 plus 3.5 plus 4. The next unit costs an extra 4.5. And so what we do is we just keep adding the extra cost. Okay, so we're at 10.5, and now plus the next one is 4.5, so it'll be 15, and then next one is 5. So we add that's 20. Next one, 5.5, and 6. Right. Okay. Next column, total net gain, and so that is like profit. That will be total revenue minus total cost. So the numbers that we just calculated. So 6 minus 3, 12 minus 6.5, 18 minus 10.5, 24 minus 15, 30 minus 20, 36 minus 25.5. Oops, sorry, it should be 10.5. 42 minus 31.5, that's also 10.5. 10. Okay. Now, okay, so the producer, of course, wants to maximize their profit. Now we have 2 maximum profits here. So the highest profit is 10.5, and we have 2 quantities that will occur at. Now the producer, or anybody, actually anybody in any circumstance, we always assume that they choose the quantity at the equilibrium. Okay, so even though the profit is the same at 6 as it is at 7, they will choose the equilibrium between the marginal cost and marginal benefit, or in this case, marginal revenue and marginal cost. And so we can see that that equilibrium is here at the quantity of 7. Okay, so for the producer, they want to get the maximum profit, but in terms of marginal analysis, what they're doing is at each unit, they are figuring out, does the marginal revenue cover the cost? And so as long as the marginal revenue covers the cost, they will continue production. And that is then up to the equilibrium. This is the last unit for which the marginal revenue will cover the cost. If they were to continue, then they're going to start to lose money on each unit, right? So they're still making a profit, for example, here if they produced 8 units, but they would have lost money on this 8th unit, right? They would have made money on the first 7, and then on the 8th unit they would have lost $0.50 and so on, then lose $1. So obviously they're not going to produce those units. They'll stop here. Okay, so this is the equilibrium. Last column, marginal net gain. So that's marginal profit. So that will be marginal revenue minus marginal cost. So now these numbers here. So marginal revenue, marginal cost. So 6 minus 3, 6 minus 3.5, 6 minus 4, 6 minus 4.5, and so on. So we keep going. And of course, at the equilibrium, then that marginal profit is 0. So they're just breaking even on that very last unit. If they were to continue, they would lose $0.50 on that one, lose $1 on that one, and lose $1.50 on that one. Okay, so now we can answer the questions. At what quantity does Carrie's marginal revenue equal marginal cost? So that's at 7. At what quantity is her profit maximized? So that's at 7. How many pies should she produce? Obviously 7. And at the optimal quantity, her marginal net gain is 0. So she's just breaking even on that last unit. Any questions? Yeah.
Why is marginal revenue equal to change in total revenue over a change in quantity? Can that just be total revenue over a quantity?
That would be average. So a marginal has to be just the extra amount.
So that's where we put the change.
That's right, yeah. So the delta means that the extra amount, yeah.
But like, aren't you just doing 6 divided by 1 equals 6, 12 divided by 2 equals 6, so on?
Well, the marginal revenue is constant, so it'll work out to the same. Yeah, that's right. So this here, the marginal revenue is constant. Now, it's not always the case, but in this example, the marginal revenue is constant because the price would be constant. Yeah, but that's not always the case. Yeah, so it is different from average. Any other questions? Okay, good. All right, so that is marginal analysis. So now we're going to move on to the next topic. Which is sunk costs. All right, so sunk costs are costs that have already been paid for, and then there's no way to get your money back, or there's no way to get the cost back or recover the cost. Okay, so sunk costs are, once you've incurred the cost, there's nothing you can do about it. And so these kinds of costs, of course, pose a problem, because these are the kind of costs where you it was how you would describe the cost when you get into a situation that you later regret. But there's nothing you can do about it at the time. And so when you're in these kinds of situations where you have incurred some kind of cost and there's nothing you can do about it and you regret it, you just have to figure out what's the next best thing that I can do, right? I can't do anything about this kind of cost, so what's the next best thing that I can do? All right, so lots of examples here. So rent, right? If you've paid your rent for the month and then you decide to move out a couple weeks early, nothing you can do about that, right? You're not going to get money back for that. Haircuts, right? If you get a bad haircut, not like this, but you know, a bad haircut, there's nothing you can do about it after, right? So if you do get a bad haircut, what's the only thing that you can do?
You go get another haircut to fix it.
You can. Well, yeah. Unless you've cut it really short. There's nothing more to cut off, right? Yeah. So you could try to fix it. Yeah, so that means paying more, right, for another haircut, which you will regret then, having paid for 2 haircuts. But there's nothing that you could do about it, right? That's the only thing that you could do. Or if you've cut it too short and there's nothing you can do, nothing more to cut off, then you just have to wait for it to grow out. Right? Car repairs. Okay, So car repairs as well. Like haircuts, you can't get your money back. Right? So if you get something repaired on the car and then you decide that, well, that was not necessary, or or I shouldn't have done that because now I'm going to sell it anyway, you're not going to get your money back for that. Time already spent doing something. Right? So often you do something and then you've realized that it's been a waste of time, but of course you can't go back in time and undo it. Right? So let's say you were trying something, like trying to say cook something, some sort of new dish, and so you spend all this time preparing the food and doing the cooking, and then you taste it, and then you realize like, oh, it's terrible. But that's a sunk cost at that point. You can't do anything. Investment losses, no one's going to give you your money back. Lottery tickets, accidents as well. So yeah, so this is a sunk cost. What should you do? Clean it up, because that's the only thing you can do, right? Like you might be sad that you've spilled your milk, but the only thing that you can do is clean it up, and if you really still want milk, you can go and get yourself another glass of milk, right? But there's nothing you can do about it. So the point with a sunk cost is that your decision should not focus on the sunk cost at all, because there's nothing that you can do about it. Your decision should be, what should I do now? Like what are my options to do now? What's the best thing to do now? And I have to just forget about whatever has happened that is a sunk cost. I have to forget about it and figure out how to make the best of the situation now. Okay, so sunk costs should be excluded from current decisions. So you have to forget about them, accept the loss, move on, figure out what's the next best thing to do. Okay, example. You bought a $100 textbook in plastic wrap. So you know when you go to the bookstore and you get a brand new book and it's in the plastic wrap, then as long as you keep the plastic wrap on, it's possible to return it, right? But as soon as you take the plastic wrap off of it, then you can't return it. Okay, so anyway, so it's in plastic wrap for a course that looked interesting, but after going to the first class, you decided to drop it. You had unfortunately already removed the plastic wrap. So now you're not going to get the $100 back. Your friend offers to pay you $70 for it. Should you sell it? Yeah, because what else are you going to do, right? Now you're going to lose money, right? You're going to be losing $30, but if you don't sell it, you're going to lose the full $100. So it's better to at least try and get some of your money back. Okay, so the full $100 is the sunk cost, and all you can do is try to get some of that back. Kind of, yeah. So we're going to get to that. So there's, when you have a sunk cost, there's, when you make a marginal decision after incurring a sunk cost, then the marginal decision is just about what to do now in the future, right? So, whereas the sunk cost is not part of the marginal cost because the sunk cost has already happened, right? So a marginal cost and benefit is about what you're going to do now, whereas the sunk cost has already happened. So the sunk cost is part of the total cost of the situation, but it's not part of the marginal cost of what you're going to do next. Okay, so yeah, we'll go through a couple examples here where we illustrate that idea. Okay, so repairing an old car. Old cars are tricky. Old cars are always tricky. And an old car is, when you have it and you have to spend money on it, you can think of that as investing in the car. And so when you have an old car and things go wrong, you have to make a decision. Do I invest in it to try and keep it going, or do I just let it go, give it to the junkyard? Okay. So this is a very old car, and the car is valued at $1,000, but then it stops running. Okay, so the situation is that the car is worth $1,000, but only if it's actually running, right? So you could sell it for $1,000 if it's running, but then something goes wrong. And now you're not going to get anything for it unless you fix it. So should you fix it or not fix it? This will be the question. Okay, so if it is fixed, it can be sold for $1,000, but if it's not fixed, then your only option is to take it to the junkyard, and at the junkyard, they're going to give you $100 for it. Okay, it will cost you this much to fix it. So should you fix it or not fix it? You should fix it, that's right. Because if you fix it, you will spend the $600 and then you can sell it for $1,000. So you're going to get a net benefit then of $400. And if you don't fix it, you're only going to get $100. Yeah, so it's better to get a net of $400 rather than only getting $100 for it at the junkyard. Good. Okay, so then you should try to sell it as soon as possible, but it doesn't always work out. So you try to sell it, but it doesn't sell. So the car does not sell yet. And after a few months, the car stops running again. Okay, now, at this point, you will be thinking, I wish I had just taken it to the junkyard. But you didn't. You decided to invest in the car to keep it running, and you already spent this money. So now this is now a sunk cost, and there's nothing that you can do about it. Okay, so now you're in a situation that you are regretting. This is a sunk cost situation. And you have to decide, do I spend more money on the car to get it running so that I can sell it? Or do I just give up on it and take it to the junkyard? Okay, now, so now there's two approaches here. So one approach is to completely not think about the sunk cost and just think about what's the marginal costs and benefits of what I do now. Or you can think about the total costs and benefits of the situation, in which case you would include the sunk cost. Okay, so this second repair will cost $550. Now, if you do this second repair, what will be your total cost, including the sunk cost? $1,150, right? $550 plus $600. So you would have spent $1,150 on it. But then it will be running. You can sell it as soon as possible for $1,000, and then you're going to lose How much? How much will you lose? 150, that's right. So you will have spent 1150, you'll sell it for 1,000, you'll have lost 150. Okay, so yeah, regrettable situation for sure. But what if you don't do that? What if you just take it to the junkyard now? If you just take it to the junkyard now, how much money will you have lost? 500, that's right. Because the junkyard's going to give you 100, and after investing 600 in it, you're going to have lost 500. Now, either way, you're going to lose money, right? Either way, you're going to lose money. How do you lose the least amount of money? You do the second repair again, right? Yeah. So, of course, you're regretting it, having done the first repair in the first place. But you can't do anything about it. So the best thing to do now is to pay for this repair, and then you will lose $150, but it's better than losing 500 by taking it to the junkyard now and only getting 100 after investing 600 in the car. Okay, so that's one way of looking at it, where you're sort of looking at the entire situation, including the sunk cost. But the other way to look at it is just in terms of moving forward, what's the marginal costs and benefits of doing this repair? The marginal benefit of doing this repair is that you will get paid $1,000 for the car, and the marginal cost of this repair is just this cost here. This is just the marginal cost now when you do the second repair. And so then you'll have a net marginal benefit of $450, which is better than taking it to the junkyard. Okay, so we can look at it both ways, but you come to the same conclusion. All right. Okay, so the net benefit using marginal analysis for the second repair would be the $450. And so then that's better than just taking it to the junkyard and getting $100 for it. And then down here, this is where we're thinking about it in terms of the total costs and benefits of the situation. And so if you do the second repair, your total cost is $1,150, you'll get paid $1,000, you'll lose $150, which is better than having done the first repair, but then not doing the second repair and just taking it to the junkyard, and then because that way you only get $100 for the car and after spending $600. So this is very similar to like investing in a car like this. It's very similar to situations if you have your own business and you're considering spending money on your business. So let's say you start your business is losing money, and then you have to decide, do I spend more money on the business and risk losing more money, but in the hopes that the business will improve and succeed? Or do I just give up on the business? It's the same scenario. Because every time you spend money on your business and you put time and effort into your business, after you've done it, it becomes a sunk cost. And so at each point in time, you have to decide, do I invest more in it or do I walk away and give up on it? Same with an old car. So this is called a sunk cost dilemma then. So once you've incurred the sunk costs, and as you move forward in time, you're going to keep incurring more sunk costs. And at each point in time, you're always making the same decision. Do I keep going? Do I keep investing money into this? Or do I just walk away and give up on it? And no one ever knows the answer. That's the true problem. No one ever knows the answer because you can't predict exactly what's going to happen in the future, right? You might really succeed by investing, or you might just keep losing and losing and losing. Okay. Okay. We got that. All right, exercise 4. You have bought a $10 non-refundable ticket. Okay, that word non-refundable tells us that this will be a sunk cost. Okay, so it's a non-refundable ticket for a lacrosse game. You know that going to the lacrosse game will give you a benefit equal to $20. After you bought the ticket, you hear that there will be a football game at the same time. Tickets to the football game cost $20, and you know that going to the football game will give you a benefit of $35. Okay, so you tell your friends, if I'd known about the football game before buying the ticket to the lacrosse game, I would have gone to the football game instead. But now that I already have the ticket to the lacrosse game, it's better for me to just go to the lacrosse game. Okay. Now, just like with the car, we'll look at the decision from a marginal analysis perspective as well as total costs and benefits of the situation. Okay, so lacrosse game. If you go to the lacrosse game, your marginal benefit is $20. If you go to the football game, your marginal benefit is $35. Okay, now, you already have the ticket for the lacrosse game. A marginal analysis is an extra cost. Do you have any extra cost now if you go to the lacrosse game? No, because you already have the ticket. So there is no additional cost. There is no additional cost. But if you go to the football game, there is an additional cost because you haven't paid for it yet. So there'll be the additional cost of $20. Okay, so using marginal analysis, which one is better? Yeah. So the net here, the net marginal benefit would be $20. The net marginal benefit here would be $15. So better to just go to the lacrosse game. Okay, now the other way that we can think about it is in terms of total costs and benefits. And so then we're looking at the entire situation. So this will include the sunk cost. All right, so benefits. Benefits the same. $20 if you go to the lacrosse game. $35 if you go to the football game. The total cost of going to the lacrosse game, so this is including what you already paid, is $10. What would be the total cost if you go to the football game? How much money in total would you have spent? $30, that's right, because you would have paid for both tickets. All right, so the net, 10 for the lacrosse, 5 for the football game. All right, so same conclusion then, same conclusion. This is bigger than this, and this is bigger than this. So either way, we would decide to go to the lacrosse game because the net benefits are larger. Now, of course, if you had known about the football game earlier, then you wouldn't have paid for the lacrosse ticket and you would have just gone to the football game. But tough luck, you didn't know about it. Okay. Any questions? All right, so the other part of Chapter 9 is called Behavior Economics, and it's about whether or not people actually make rational decisions. And it turns out we don't often. We often don't. Okay, so rational, the word rational for economists just means that anybody just does something when the benefit covers the cost, or the benefit's greater than the cost, or at least equal to the cost. Okay, so that's the idea of being rational. But it can be really complicated because what we consider to be costs and benefits can be complicated, right? There's monetary costs and benefits, and then there's other types of costs and benefits in terms of feelings or just other types of satisfaction that we get from, hanging out with our friends or whatever that doesn't involve any money. So there's other types of costs and benefits that we're getting that factor into our decisions. And then there's also the fact that we are emotional, right? So we're not objective when we make all decisions. We have emotions, we have beliefs about what we think should happen anyway, and there's all sorts of things that are going on in our brain that make us make a decision that doesn't always make sense. Okay, so, all right, so, what's next? Okay. So often this is going to be not the case. So first we're going to talk about monetary costs and benefits. So the benefits and costs are not just monetary. So often we do things even when the monetary benefit is less than the monetary cost. So this is what we'll talk about first. Now, the reason why someone would do this is because they must be getting some sort of additional benefit that's non-monetary that will, to them, justify the cost. Okay, and so there's lots of reasons why we will do this. So first, we have concerns about these sorts of things here. We like to do the right thing, we like to do the polite thing, we like to be fair, and so we are willing to incur more costs to ensure that there's a fair outcome or a proper outcome. Okay, so some examples. So first example, sorry about this here. Okay, so people care about how their behavior makes them feel. Okay, so first example is giving tips when you go to a restaurant. So, so when you go to a restaurant, you're supposed to leave a tip. Now, it doesn't actually make any sense, though, because that means you're incurring a cost by giving money to somebody else, and you're not really getting anything in return, especially since you don't give the tip until after, so it doesn't really guarantee you the good service. But anyway, we do it because we feel it's the right thing to do. Right? And I don't know about you, but I, for example, sometimes I've gone to the restaurant with my grandma, or I did when she was alive, and she would leave like 25 cents. And then I'd be super embarrassed, and I'd get out my wallet and put some more money on the table. Anyway, so because I felt like, you were supposed to leave a tip, more than 25 cents. Okay, so what's happening there is it's about etiquette, right? People feel like it's the right thing to do, and you'll do it because, well, you don't want to look bad, Anyway, so, and then the next one is related, gift giving, right? So gift giving, you're supposed to give gifts in lots of different situations in life. even though it's going to cost you money, and even if often sometimes it's to people that you don't even really know that well, you still do it because it's the proper thing to do in a certain situation. And so it's about etiquette again. You know, you're supposed to do it to be a proper person. The next one, littering. Okay, so littering, yeah. If you could just walk along and just throw your garbage on the ground, it would save you a lot of time and effort if you did that. But most of us, of course, won't. I hope not. Because littering is being bad. And so if we did it, we would feel really guilty about it. And so that guilt cost prevents most of us from littering. Last one, sharing a cookie with a friend. And so again, most of us would do that. Not everybody, but most of us would. Even though it makes you worse off because then you have less cookie to eat for yourself. But you do it because that's what a good friend should do, right? So it's going to benefit you in terms of your relationships. Okay, so we're going through examples then of when people do something even when it's costing them money. And so the idea is that there's some other kind of benefit that we're getting that justifies that monetary cost. All right. Next one. Okay, the next one is bounded rationality. And so this is the various ways in which our brains do not actually allow us to make completely objective observations or rational calculations of costs and benefits. Okay, so we are very smart. We do have big brains, but there's lots of reasons why we are very biased or anyway, we just don't quite know how to sort out the costs and benefits in order to make a good decision. All right. Okay, so first of all, partly it's the effort of thinking and calculating when you have to make a decision, especially a big decision. Right, if it's a little decision, you don't really think about the effort of thinking, right? If you're just shopping for some new toothpaste, you don't really think about it too much. But if you're shopping for, say, like a new phone, it's not an easy decision, right? You've got so many options, and so you got to look at all these options, and you got to look at the features of the different phones, and then you have to compare the prices, and it takes a lot of effort, right? Now, when you're shopping for something like a new phone, if you really, really, really wanted to make the absolute very best decision, you would look at all the phones that are available for sale. Do you do that? No, there's too many, right? So usually what you do instead is you maybe ask some friends for some suggestions, so then you look at, you know, 5 or maybe 10 at the most, because any more than that's going to take too much time to think about it and to research it. So you look at a few of them, and then you decide based on that. And so then it might not be the very, very, very best phone for you because you haven't looked at all the options, but well, you'll say that's good enough. That'll be good, right? Okay, so this is the first example. This is called the good enough method then. The good enough method then is when we don't do all the research that we really should. We just do a little bit of research, we gather a little bit of information, enough that we feel like we're making a decision that is good enough. Okay, so consumers approximate a choice using a small sample of information. Yeah, we don't do all the research necessary. And so you can think about that actually in terms of marginal analysis. When you are making a decision, you have to decide how much time and effort to put into that decision. Time and effort putting into the decision is costly. And there's a marginal benefit to it, though. And so what we do is we decide on an optimal amount of, like thinking effort to put into some sort of decision. And of course, if it's a bigger thing like a phone or a car, we're going to put much more effort into it than if it's something small. Okay, now the next set of examples is about ways in which our brains actually just don't gather information very well. So we have, first one, pricing. Okay, so yeah, so the reason why prices are all like this, there's a very good reason for it. Prices always are something 0.99 because when we look at a number, our brains pay more attention to the first number on the left. And so it's like you can't help it. That's just the way our brains work. Our brains look at the first number on the left first. And so because we pay more attention to that number, then 4.99 seems like it's a lot different than 5. And of course, it's not really that different from 5. Okay, next example. Seeing the answer key before doing practice questions makes you believe the question is easier than it actually is, right? So if you look at practice questions and you don't look at the blank ones, you just look at the answer key, then you go along saying, that looks easy, that looks easy. Yeah, I don't need to study that, that looks easy, right? And so you're tricking yourself into thinking that it's actually easier than it is. And then our eyes don't see things very well either. So plate size affects how much food we eat. Or other things as well. I've read about this one funny experiment. I'm not quite sure how it worked, but they had people come in and sit down at tables and eat soup. And they had half the people just eat regular soup from regular bowls, but the other half of the people, they had little tubes going up under the table into the bowl. And then as the people were eating the soup, they were feeding more soup into their bowl. So their bowl was not going down as fast as it would. And so then they tested, what would be the difference. And the people who were getting more soup put into their bowls ended up eating a lot more soup. But they didn't notice. They didn't notice. They didn't say that they were any fuller than the other people who hadn't had the soup put into their bowls. Or we're tricked by the names of things. Right? So if something is given a really fancy name, we'll think it's better than it is. So I read about another experiment where people were given smells, and then they were told what the smell was, and it wasn't always true though, right? So they were just told something what it was. So they were given, say, a really stinky smell, and some of the people were told it was like a dirty sock, and then other people were told it was some really fancy cheese. And then the people who were told that it was a really fancy cheese thought, oh, it smells good, which didn't make any sense because it was the same smell as the stinky sock people. And then, of course, prejudice is based on people's appearance, right? We misjudge people. We misjudge the costs and benefits that people can offer, either in a good way or in a bad way, right? So for me, for example, because I'm taller than average, in high school, I had lots of people tell me, you must be good at basketball, just because I'm taller. And it was totally not true. And totally not fair, because that meant that all those people were also assuming that anybody who was shorter than average was not very good at basketball. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So our senses don't always tell us the truth. Now, let's see. Okay, let's do one more, and then we'll take a break. Okay, so the last one here is another way in which we end up spending more money. then it actually makes rational sense to spend. And that's to do with insurance and other situations as well, where we are, because most of us don't like risk, we are willing to pay extra to not incur the risk. Or we're willing to not get as much benefit, but then also not have as much risk. Okay, so insurance is one example. Now, when you buy insurance, it's because something might happen, like you get into a car accident. Now, a really rational calculation would be just, what's the probability that I'm going to get into a car accident, and what's the cost if I get into a car accident? So that's called an expected value. So an expected value is just the probability of something happening multiplied by the value if it does happen. Okay, now when you buy insurance, what you pay for the insurance is always going to be more than that because they need to make a profit. So they have to charge you more money than is your actual expected cost. So why do we buy insurance? Well, car insurance you have to buy. But there's other types of insurance where you don't have to buy it, but you buy it anyway because when you buy the insurance, then you don't have to worry about it anymore, right? You know that you're covered if something bad happens. So for everybody, for most people, the expected cost of the risk plus the cost of worrying outweighs the cost of the insurance, and that's why we buy insurance. Okay. Okay, let's continue. All right, so the last part of the chapter is about some examples where people actually make irrational choices, which means these are examples in which people are making themselves worse off rather than better off. Okay, so these are the 6 mistakes of economic decision making. All right, so first one is about partly about sunk costs. So you guys just learned about sunk costs and how, because you can't do anything about the sunk costs, you really should just forget about it and try and figure out what's the next best thing to do. But it's really hard to forget about it, right? If you spent money, like spending money on an old car, it's really hard to just forget about it. You tend to want to do what you can to try and get the money back, even though you can't. Okay, so for sunk costs, we tend to hang on to them, and we tend to let them factor into our future decisions, even though it doesn't help at all. And then the other thing we do is we don't always consider all the opportunity costs of decisions. Okay, we don't always consider all the opportunity costs of decisions. Okay, so those are the first two, number one. So this is about mistakes we make to do with costs. So it's the exclusion of non-monetary costs and the inclusion of sunk costs. So this is the mistake, though. Okay, so this is the mistake, though, because it should be the opposite, right? We should include non-monetary costs in our decisions. So those are implicit costs. That was at the beginning of Chapter 9. And we should exclude sunk costs. Okay, but as people, we often do the opposite of that. Okay, so one example here about implicit costs, as somebody will say it's cheaper to grow your own vegetables. In monetary costs, yeah, so there's very little explicit cost to grow your own vegetables, but there's a lot of implicit costs because it takes a lot of work and a lot of effort. Or another example like this one, when I had my kids, before I had the first one, I read that if you got washable diapers, it would be way cheaper in the long run than buying the disposable diapers. And yes, the explicit cost would be much less if you got washable diapers. But then, you gotta wash them. And they are not clean. And also, for my daughter anyway, they leaked. They leaked. So I had to wash my clothes, and I would wash her clothes, and I had to wash the diapers. So they did not last very long. Okay, then the next one is about a sunk cost. Okay, Meg just bought a brand new Ford SUV for towing her canoe on summer weekends. But high weekly gas bills makes her wish she had a small, compact Yaris. And then she says, but I already paid for it. That's not the right way to think about it, though, because what she has already paid for this brand new truck, which she probably regrets paying for a brand new truck, it's a sunk cost, right? Once you have bought a vehicle, a brand new vehicle, and you drive it off the lot, that becomes a sunk cost. And so is that a reason to keep the vehicle? No, because you could sell it, right? She could sell it. In this case, she could sell it, and then she could buy the smaller car now. And so when you're making the decision, then you have to forget about what you've already paid for the truck. Try not to buy a new truck again in the future. And now you just consider what's the future cost of the two options. What's the future cost of keeping the truck versus if you sell it and buy the small car, what would be the future cost of that? And so as long as that cost is higher, then you should go ahead and sell it. Okay, now, next one, overconfidence. Okay, so, yeah, so in a lot of situations, people suffer from overconfidence. Okay, so for example, how many of you guys drive a car? And out of all of you guys who drive a car, how many of you are better than average at driving? Yes, definitely, right? Everyone else is a bit of an idiot on the road, but not you. Okay, so we are all overconfident in our abilities for certain things. Okay, and I've got some other examples here. Okay, so yeah, so there's lots of examples of this. So, so better drivers, better parents, right? So if you guys have kids in the future, now not only will you probably think that you're doing a better job than other people, but also you're going to think that your kids are cuter than other kids. You're going to think your kids are smarter than all the other kids, right? Better students, next one, better students, right? So when you're a student, just like when you're driving a car and you think you're a better driver, when you're a student, you tend to think, yeah, I work really hard. I study a lot. Better than average, for sure. Better decision makers, healthier eaters. Anyway, so in all these ways, what we think we're doing is not really actually what we're doing. A couple examples here where other examples. So predicting the stock market. So in the future, if you guys have extra money and you're thinking about putting into the stock market, What everyone suffers from then is overconfidence in their ability to pick a good stock. Everyone's going to think that they can actively pick one that's going to outperform all the other ones, and of course, on average, that will not happen. Another example, people who think they can do two things well at the same time, like texting and driving, right? Why do people text while they're driving? Because they think they can. I read about a woman in Kelowna. She was caught, she was not texting actually, but it made me think of it. She was caught eating noodles, ramen noodles. So she had a hot cup of the instant noodles in one hand, and she had chopsticks in the other hand, and she was speeding. Why was she doing that? She was hungry, and she really felt that she would be a good driver while she was eating her noodles. Pay attention to the teacher and play phone games at the same time. Not that you guys ever do that, I know, but if you did, it's because you could, I'm sure, pay attention to both at the same time. All right, so what's happening here is what we believe to be the costs and benefits of the situation are then not the actual costs and benefits of the situation. All right, so what we believe is not what's actually happening. So that woman who was eating noodles while she was speeding, she really thought that the cost of that behavior was a lot lower than it actually was. Okay, next one. How often do you say to yourself, I will study tomorrow? Not today, I'm feeling a bit tired today. Tomorrow I'm going to be super productive. So, unrealistic expectations about future behavior. So we are over-optimistic about our future behavior. Things that we don't want to do today, we believe we will want to do them tomorrow. So whatever that is, studying, saving money. So we procrastinate because we really think that we will be more disciplined tomorrow. And I still do it. Except now, instead of studying, I procrastinate about making the exams. And I know you guys have a second midterm coming up in a couple weeks, right? And I still haven't started on the exams. But tomorrow I'm going to. I've got some free time tomorrow, which I'm not going to do anything fun in that free time. I know that I'm going to do some work. All right, next one. Okay. Suppose that you walked out of here into the parking lot and you found $10 laying on the ground. Would you save that $10 or would you spend it? You'd probably spend it, right? Yeah. So most people would, because for some reason, if we like get free money, so like you win it or you find it or somebody, your grandma gives you money, whatever it is, for some reason we tend to, or we're much more likely to go out and spend it. So it doesn't really make sense though, because when we spend the $10, whether we found it or whether we earned it, when we spend the $10, it has the same opportunity cost. If we spend it on whatever, coffee at Starbucks, we're still giving up the same thing as if we had earned the $10. But for some reason, when we believe or we feel like the money is worth different amounts, whether we've earned it or whether we have found it or been given it. Right? So this is called mental accounting, where we have different, it's like having different bank accounts in our head, where we've got earned money and then we've got fun money. And it's the same money, but for some reason we treat them differently. Okay, so mentally assigning dollars to different accounts, and the different accounts have different values. So this is why, actually there's a reality show I think about this. When people have won the lottery and then they just blow through the money, within like the first year or whatever. This is exactly what's happening to them. They win the lottery, but to them it's all fun money, so they get to just go out and blow it. Okay, now a couple more. Okay, so the next one is actually related to sunk costs again. And it's related to the idea that it's hard for us to let go of sunk costs. So this is called loss aversion, and it's about our oversensitivity to losses. So when we incur a loss, it is very hard for us to move on from that. We tend to think about it and dwell on it. So if you make a bad decision, it's hard to forget about it, right? You tend to keep thinking about that bad decision over and over and over again, even though it doesn't make any sense. I mean, as long as you learn your lesson and hopefully don't make the same bad decision again. But otherwise, you should just move on, right? But it's hard to do that because we don't like failing, right? And so if we lose something, if we incur loss, we feel like we failed, and it's hard to forget about it. Okay, and so here, now that story about the old car that we talked about this morning, that story about the old car is actually a true story of my very first car. So my very first car was an old Honda Civic that I had bought from my grandma at a very good price. And it was not that old when I bought it, so it was very reliable for a long time. And I kept repairing it, partly because I had sort of an emotional attachment to it. It was my first car. I got it when I was 16. We lived in a small town, so that was freedom. You had to have a car. There was no bus. So that car took me everywhere, right? I went on road trips with my friend when we got older. I did so much in that car, and it was rusty, and it was so ugly, but it was really comfortable, and so I kept repairing it, partly because I just didn't want to get a different car. I wanted to keep that car. And so that sort of affected my judgment then. I should have just taken it to the junkyard a lot sooner, but I didn't. Okay, so people avoid paying the emotional cost of accepting a loss. And it's the same thing with bad relationships, too. Bad relationships, same thing as an old car. Sometimes you just keep plugging away at it, hoping that things will improve and the person will change. Okay, last one, status quo bias. So status quo bias is a little bit different. It's about the idea that a lot of us don't like change in general, and we will avoid change, and we prefer to just keep doing the same thing over and over again. even if it's not the best decision for us, but we just don't want to make any changes. So we just keep doing the same thing over and over again. Or else, another example of status quo bias is when you don't, it's not that you don't want to make a different decision, it's that you don't want to make a decision at all. So what you do instead is you look and see what are other people deciding to do, and then you just do whatever everybody else is doing. So it's about our reluctance to make a decision at all. Okay, so yeah, so we're kind of lazy about making decisions. So, for example, you might want to change your phone plan, but you tend to keep talking about changing your phone plan, and then it takes you forever to actually do it. And so what's happening here is we either don't want to make a decision or we don't want to change what we're doing because we feel like the change is going to be really costly, even though in reality usually it isn't, but before you do it, it feels like it's going to be really costly. Okay, so for a lot of us then, what we think is that the benefit of doing something different is not high enough compared to what we think of will be the transition cost or the cost of making a change.